Welcome to week 7. We are going to be covering chapter 4, consciousness, in this week material. Here is your to-do list. Just make sure again that everyone's paying attention to appropriate due dates, and when in doubt, because sometimes errors get made at the last minute, always check the syllabus because we know that's correct and has all the correct due dates. So again, please keep that syllabus close by, print it out so that way you can refer to it. But this week we're going to be covering consciousness, and it's a relatively shorter chapter, I would say, compared to the rest. But this is one that actually gets a ton of interest from students. It's just really fun to talk about dreams, and what our brain is doing when we're dreaming, hypnosis, different sleep disorders is some really interesting stuff. So I think you guys will like this chapter. Definitely understand the roles, the definitions of the different levels of consciousness, that we're not always in the same state of consciousness. It depends, right? Things happen sometimes at a subliminal level. They happen out of our awareness, yet they affect us. And then there's things we're very conscious of and very purposeful in doing. So the beginning of the chapter really kind of dives into getting you familiar with those different levels, and then goes right into talking about sleep, because sleep is really an essential component of consciousness. It's during sleep that our body restores itself and repairs itself. A lot of our biological processes of especially our parasympathetic nervous system, operate when we're sleeping. So the cycles of sleep really matter. So you're going to get introduced to the different stages of sleep, otherwise known as the different sleep cycles, and understanding just exactly what happens during the REM stage of sleep, which is basically the restorative stage where cells repair themselves and multiply in the body, and organs, rest and restore, and all of that recuperative types of activity takes place. This is also where we see a variety of sleep disorders pop up. So you're going to get introduced to what those are. And then here's where we get into some of the funner sort of topics of the chapter, and that are revolving around dreams. And it's just interesting because, again, the book is going to talk about some cultural differences there. Dreams mean different things depending upon where you're from, depending upon your gender, depending upon your life experiences. So that's always really neat. And I actually tweeted a little bit about consciousness this week, so hopefully you guys will enjoy that, have some fun with that. But also then it goes into how can we use altered states of consciousness maybe to our advantage, and one way that we do so is hypnosis. Doesn't work for everyone, but what is it? How does it work? And what's actually happening to the brain when we're under hypnosis? So we're going to explore some of that. Gets into a little bit of psychoactive drugs, how they affect your brain, because what they're doing is they're altering consciousness, and how we can become psychologically dependent when that happens. So the book gets into a little bit of discussion of some drugs and behavior, which you get a lot more of actually if you take physiological psych. We'll go into grave detail about stimulants, depressants, hallucinogens, and all of that. But here you're just getting kind of like a overview of how these affect your body and your levels of consciousness. And then it ends with some fun stuff on supernatural visitations like ESP and things like we hear about in pop culture. So that's it. Those are the objectives for the chapter. You've got some lecture slides here that follow along, and you're going to be watching the videos in episode 6 of Consciousness, so pretty straightforward there. I just really want to reiterate that I noticed people responding to the discussions very early in the week, like Monday or Tuesday. When that happens, I take pause because I'm just wondering, did you really digest the material? If I posted on Sunday, have you had a chance to watch the videos, do the reading, look at the lecture slides, do the reading again, maybe, before you're responding to the discussion questions? And the answer should be yes to all of those things. However, if you're responding on Monday or Tuesday, I'm kind of thinking that's not enough time and that maybe that's not all getting done. And that is sometimes very clear to me in responses when people are responding in a discussion post and they're not integrating any of the videos, or they're not referring to the main textbook. They're not making reference to any of this stuff when they're answering this stuff. That really tells me a lot. So I would think for this week, your aim in trying to get a 10 out of 10 on discussion would be to do that, to integrate in what you're reading as a whole, so not just the Hawk reading, which is kind of where I pull the questions from, but the Hawk reading taps right onto what we're talking about in the main chapter on consciousness. And it taps right onto what you watched in the videos for the chapter. So you should be pulling that stuff in. Again, these discussions should be lengthier than I'm seeing, and they should be showcasing and showing off to me what you know, what you've learned, like how you can explain something and sound like you really know what you're talking about, okay? Like it's not just an opinion, or it's not just something you feel or you think, but it's an answer to a question based on what you've been reading and what you've been learning, okay? So the Hawk reading for the week has a lot to do with specific research, and that is research in the area of sleepwalking. What our brain is doing when we're sleepwalking, what stage of sleep are we in when we sleepwalk? How are our brainwave patterns when we're sleepwalking? Could someone really commit a crime and not even be aware that they're doing it? In fact, this has been the topic of a number of different jury cases, where a crime's been committed. Someone claimed that they were sleepwalking. And, what did that look like? What was their case? Do they have a case? Is there research that supports that? So when I talk about what kind of evidence would be required to convince a jury that a crime was committed while sleepwalking, well, what would you need? What would you need to show? If you're the lawyer working on that case, what would you want to present to make a solid case for that? So that's kind of one part of the discussion. And you're going to want to go back up and pull in some of this stuff to support what you're saying, and then cite it, reference where you're getting your information from. And then the last part of the discussion deals with what do you think the role is of dreams? Because there's people that come from different schools of thoughts. Some people say that our dreams have meaning. If you have heard about Freud, we talked about him a little bit in the beginning of the semester. We'll do a little bit more towards the end of the semester. But proponents or advocates of psychodynamic theory, which is Freud's theory, say that our dreams are meaningful. They mean something. It's our brain trying to work things out while we're sleeping. Other people don't subscribe to that at all. Specifically, neuroscientists have done lots of research on what our brain is actually doing when we're sleeping. How are the neurons communicating when we're sleeping? And they realize that, well, from their point of view, a lot of it is random neural firings that just happen. And they happen to also tap into memories that you've stored throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your life, could come about as these neurons are kind of firing, which is why they claim that our dreams often don't make sense, but our dreams tap into realities of our life, things we might be afraid of, or things we might be thinking about or worrying over. So those are kind of like the two schools of thought. And you really have to, I'm looking here for you to take a stance and then support it. So don't just tell me what you think is happening or why you think that's happening, but from a research perspective. what does the research show to support your viewpoint? Okay, so I hope to see that happening a little bit more this week as you get into the discussion. There's a quiz this week covering this chapter on consciousness, and then there's an exam, and the exam is covering chapters 4 and 6. So if you recall, chapter 6 was last week. That was our memory chapter, and then this chapter as well. And that's it for your week. So please let me know as you're working if you have questions about the discussions. One thing that I did do is for the exam, I thought I'd try something different this week. And you still have the 35 minutes, I think it is this week, to take the exam, but I made it so that when you're taking the exam, you can go back to questions you've previously answered. Okay, now be careful, because sometimes we can lose track of time doing that, going back and changing answers. It wastes time. You want to try not to do that, but I'm going out on a limb, and I'm going to try it out and see if that might help some folks in taking this exam, being able to backtrack and check answers. So I've made that option available to you, and we'll kind of see how that goes. Okay, that's all I have for you. But again, please let me know if you have any questions throughout the week. Thanks, everyone.